Welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. I'm your host, Rob, joined this week by producer JL. John-Luc Shapiro is here on the mic. Just me and JL for this week's edition, with plenty to talk about in a Rangers world that is now post-trade deadline. This is the team that it's the team that will eventually go into the playoffs and look to compete for the franchise's fifth Stanley Cup. Very eventful week to recap. We've got a few questions to answer as well. JL, you are fresh off actually sitting in my seats in section 416 at the Garden last night. Glad you and Russ, another Blue Sea Blogs colleague, enjoyed the game. How's it going over there, my man?
It is going well. Thank you again for the seats. Me and Russ had a good time outside of the outcome. Rangers looked pretty good. I'm also just fresh off of a trip to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania via Buffalo. We went to go see me and a buddy of mine who lives out there. We went to go see the Rangers play the Penguins. And also we had just so happened to see Sabres Islanders. So it was nice to see the Islanders lose as well. So it's been a pretty eventful week. Been trying to keep up as much as I can while traveling, but it's gone pretty good. Can't complain too much. I mean, I could try, but that's just the New York coming out in me, but I won't. Not much, maybe.
Eventful week, like you said. The Rangers had a 5-game week with 2 sets of back-to-backs. Side note, they are actually done with back-to-backs now, and something to note, they went 11-1 in the second game of their 12 back-to-back sets this year. So that is just a tremendous accomplishment and something to acknowledge and appreciate about this team, which is obviously in a very good position. Now, they're a few points behind the Boston Bruins as we record this on Wednesday night. Looking forward to, of course, Thursday night's game in Boston. Florida Panthers, I think the Rangers are tied on points with them as of this recording. So they're right in the mix for the top spot in the Eastern Conference. And as I mentioned, busy 5-game week in which they went 4-1. So pretty, impressive set of results there. But the thing I want to kind of touch on to start with here, JL, and we didn't get a chance to do a show last week. So we did our trade deadline recap, but we really didn't have a lot of games to assess the deadline moves on yet. So now that we've seen, the Rangers play 7 games, since the additions of Alex Wenberg, Jack Roslovic, and Chad Ruhwedel, who got into his first game on Tuesday night against Winnipeg, the Rangers are 5-2. So the results are there. But I want to get your just first impressions of, the new guys, but also the team and how the team looks overall since the trade deadline. And as I said at the top, this is now the roster that they will take into April, May, and hopefully June.
So I'll say this just as a quick starting point. Things always tend to happen on deadline day when I am out. So obviously it was in the afternoon, so I was at work, but I decided to go get some pizza. And lo and behold, they had just traded for Wenberg as I was walking out the door. And as I was on my way to, I was actually driving on my way. My phone kept blowing up, but I couldn't see what it was. Then I hear it on WFAN, funny enough, out of all the places, is that the Rangers had traded for Jack Roslovic. And obviously WFAN not being a hockey hotbed, no one really knew how to react properly. So now that we've got a couple of games under our belt in terms of seeing what, the additions look like with, Roslovic, Ruhwedel, and Wenberg, just going off of the last couple of games, it doesn't seem like anybody's missed a beat. Generally what ends up happening, and it happened last year when Patrick Kane was traded to the Rangers, was that player, and to a smaller extent, Tarasenko, even though he contributed a little bit more down the line, excuse me, is that sometimes the players will, take a take a minute or a couple of games, to kind of get their feet wet with their new team. But it seems as if, Wenberg, Roslovic, and even Ruhwedel, just off of last night, seem to fit very well within the confines of what Laviolette and the Rangers seem to have brought forth so far in terms of system-wise. Alex Wenberg, not only is that a dashing, good-looking man, but he is just really good at his job.
The number
If there's
one handsome Ranger right now. I think he just comes in and takes that top spot right off the bat for sure.
100%. And you just see how he fits well with, Kako and Cooley. It just works. And even with VC that's been thrown on that line for a couple of shifts in a couple of games, they look good. Wenberg is a, puck possession kind of guy, and he wins a lot of 50-50 battles. I think that's one of the things that not many people seem to notice, or maybe they do. I just, haven't really seen it much online spoken yet. But Wenberg wins a lot of 50-50 battles. They are numerous times. And actually does remind me a lot of what Hedel does in the sense of how he's able to manage the puck, is that he just makes the simple play, but that goes a long way in terms of keeping the puck in the Rangers zone, or keeping the Rangers on the offense, and then it also helps that Capo Caco is just a puck managing machine. And then, obviously Will Cooley playing his heart out. So Wenberg fits like a glove. And I was very excited about the trade. I love that he's wearing number 91, because I love that's one of my favorite numbers for just a hockey sweater in general. So that seems to, really be going well. And I think that's probably the more underrated move in terms of the deadline itself for New York. Moving over to Jack Roslovic, that took a little bit of time to kind of get together, but you notice the difference in the way that Kreider, I sound like I'm in Boston, Kreider and Mika are playing, and Zibanejad has looked miles better with Roslovic on his wing, because now it seems like Mika doesn't have to feel like he's doing it all. If you've noticed prior, he's either tried to do too much and turns the puck over a lot, or he's too tentative because he doesn't want to make a mistake. But now that you have a guy like Roslovic, who is speedy, who has a great shot, and he's just phenomenal with the puck, he also wins a lot of 50-50 battles in the corners. It frees them up a little bit, and you can tell Mika definitely has more of an oomph to him. Kreider has more of an oomph to him 5-on-5. Obviously, it's still not, up to where we would like it to be, but it's significantly better. So, and this is the thing that always makes me laugh, is that I understand there are a lot of people on Twitter and a lot of people that I know that when they saw the moves come in, they were like, oh, well, this is not Alex Tucker. This is not Pavel Buchnevich, or this is not Jake Gensel. Well, hey, the Rangers seem to value their youth and their future very much. And they don't think that those guys are worth what the market was offering. And honestly, it was a good move to not part with Kako, Othman, and Perot. So even a guy like Sikora or Berard, it was good for them not to do that. Was I willing to do that in terms of, wanting to chase a cup? Maybe. But I'm not upset that they kept those guys, and they look really good. Chad Ruhwedel, I'll just say this. I just thought it was really funny. As I said, I was in Pittsburgh, and, he was there for when they won the cup in 2017, 2018, or 2017.
2017.
2017, you would think, oh, hey, we're going to get a shot of a guy sitting on the ice somewhere, and the guy's in the press box. So it looked kind of awkward. Right. I don't think the Penguins fans really knew who he was, because that fan base isn't really that knowledgeable. But, they were just, it was kind of like an awkward cheer, even though the guy was there for so long and he did win a cup with them, they just kind of treated him like he was this sort of peasant. So Ruhwedel looked really good. He fit very well with Zach Jones. Didn't see much of a problem with his game. I think he's going to be a valuable asset. I think he's going to get a couple more games down the stretch, all, considering Lindgren's out, and depends on how Zach Jones keeps up his performance. But overall, I think the trade deadline acquisitions, while not flashy, were exactly what this team needed. And their performances over the last couple of games have really shown that the Rangers essentially got the right types of players for the spots they needed to fill.
I think that where I agree with you wholeheartedly is on both Roslovic and Wenberg. I mean, look, Ruhwedel, one game, he's a depth defenseman. He does the job that you need that seventh defenseman, or maybe even eighth defenseman, to do, right? When they're fully healthy, Trouba comes back, Lindgren comes back, Zach Jones probably out of the lineup. Excuse me, Ruhwedel definitely out of the lineup. So The Rangers are quite deep on defense right now, which is awesome. Those guys not being able to dress is a good problem to have. And you could even go 11-7, in a playoff game. We've seen that done with some success and also out of panic at times. But that is an option with the defensive depth that they have. I really love Alex Wenberg. He is the exact type of player that you want on a, third line that is supposed to be kind of a, can be a shutdown line, but is also supposed to be, as you said, kind of a puck possession line. And that really is how you do properly shut down an opponent, right? You don't let them have the puck. Wenberg, I mean, he has it on a string. He's a guy that has, I would call it elite stick handling ability, but it's not flashy, right? He's not like Bedard or, McDavid or even some of the guys like we saw Nikolai Ehlers with Winnipeg on Tuesday night. Like, it's not necessarily flashy, nor does it lead to him, ripping a shot into the top corner, but he's really good in tight spaces. He's really good at keeping the puck moving in the right direction. That's kind of one of those things that I look for when I'm watching a game is like, all right, a guy goes into the corner or along the boards. Does he win his battle, right? Does the puck come out of that scrum and is it in Rangers possession? Is it moving in the right direction? With Wenberg, like you said, JL, he's winning a majority of his 50-50 pucks. Roslovic, very similar. Roslovic's a very similar style player, I think, but he's a winger. He does have a little bit more flashiness to his game. I don't know if the scoring will ever come, but, we talked about this on our deadline recap show a couple of weeks ago. He does have first round pedigree. He might kind of have a Derek Brassard-esque career trajectory where maybe he does get into the 60-point realm. I'm not sure that that's here, of course, because he's a pending free agent. But the overarching point with both Wenberg and Roslovic, I agree, not flashy moves. I think they did leave a certain segment of the fan base disappointed. But the comparison that a lot of folks have made to this being a deadline more akin to the 21-22 season where Vetrano, Kopp, Mott, Braun all fit perfectly. And the team overall got better right away. And that's the other thing that I was looking for. And I want to talk about a little bit more now. So, and I don't want to get too into the weeds with this stuff, but I keep my eye on sort of the team level metrics. And I've tweeted about them a little bit. The Rangers were really in the tank in terms of their scoring chances and expected goals for the last, 4 or 5 weeks. Now, they were winning a lot of games because Igor was playing out of his mind and they were getting timely goals, right? And that's certainly a formula for success, no doubt, especially with the Rangers' top end skill and power play. But we want them, and I think it's certainly more favorable to the team and their ability to win multiple playoff rounds if they can be average or better at 5-on-5, right? And for the Rangers, I think that means playing solid defense, right? Not running around and getting caught on long shifts and giving up, 30 shot attempts per period, right? It's more about like, can we keep the game low event, right? Can we have the scoring chances be 3-2 or the high danger chances 3-2 every period? And we have the 3 and they have the 2. That's a formula the Rangers love because they have Igor Shesterkin. And unless you're facing Connor Hellebuck or I suppose Sergei Bobrovsky, you like the Rangers' chances of converting on enough of those to win a game. Since the trade deadline, I looked this up. It's on Natural Stat Trick. The Rangers are above 50% in terms of expected goals. That's all I want. I don't need them to be 55% or 60% and dominating teams. That just doesn't happen. That's not the way the Rangers really are built. It's not the style they play. They're never throwing a ton of pucks at the net in terms of volume. The way Carolina does, or the way even, a team like Vegas might, so they are doing enough right now to control play at 5-on-5. And then they're, capitalizing on their chances enough. I mean, I think the game that is the template, and now sure, the quality of opponent matters, but the game that is the template is the Islander game. They were for 3 periods totally in control of that game, even though they were losing 1-0 at the end of the first period. And they were briefly tied. They went up 2-1, and then the game was briefly tied 2-2 in the second period. They were never in doubt. It was never a doubt about what the result of that game was going to be. You just knew that the Rangers had it handled. You knew that they had more quality than the opponent and that they were going to get enough chances to score. So I love their effort on Sunday, especially backing up a really tough game. Obviously, they beat Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh came at them really hard, especially in the third period on Saturday. They had to play 2 games in less than 24 hours with the crazy NHL scheduling, a 3 p.m. puck drop followed by a 1 p.m. puck drop. And, to me, that's the template. If you can play a majority of your games like that Islander game, you're going to be in really good shape. And the Winnipeg game was, at least for 2 periods, very similar to the Islander game. So, that's 5 of 6 periods. And that's, out of 21 or so periods that they've played since the deadline, right? In 7 games, they've probably been the better team in 14 or 15 of those periods. That is certainly a formula for success. I'll take that any time of the day, any day with this roster and the way it's constructed. And I think that's down to kind of put a bow on it, the trade deadline additions. I think Roslovic and Wenberg lengthen this lineup. Roslovic is certainly a good fit with Kreider and Zibanejad for all the reasons that you pointed out, JL. And Wenberg is just a really solid two-way player. Any other thoughts, JL? And maybe give us a quick view on your on the Pittsburgh game before we move on, since you were in attendance on Saturday. That was a game I didn't see much of. Heard the third period on the radio, sounded like an all-out assault on the net, and Jonathan Quick came up big for sure.
Yeah, so you mentioned the Sunday game against the Islanders, which a lot of, and myself included, I thought that was going to be one of those letdown games because of
No doubt.
how the third period ended up on Saturday. The Rangers absolutely dominated all throughout the first 2 periods of that game in Pittsburgh. Jonathan Quick was a little shaky. There were a couple of goals he should have saved, but they just kind of went in. But credit to Pittsburgh, they really were, like you said, putting out an all-out assault on the Rangers. The defense was kind of shaky. It was a little off, but offensively they were dominating. You just knew for most of that game that they were just going to attack New York. It seemed like every shot that they had could have possibly gone in. Tristan Jarry was not good. That also helped. He got pulled for Alex Nedeljkovic after a bit. But, overall, the offensive prowess for the Rangers was able to get them to where they were. And then Jonathan Quick woke up in the third period. He was able to basically make a lot of the saves. And like you said, and we also, intimated this in the chat, he basically saved their bacon, so it definitely helped. It was, Quick woke up. And Pittsburgh couldn't really get anything through, and the defense got better. Like I said, Quick got better, and then they were able to seal it with a couple of goals. So while it wasn't 100% their best effort, it was what they needed to do against the team that's far less talented than they are. And again, which is why I was pleasantly surprised to hear that they just absolutely dominated the Islanders on Sunday, because it shows to me that things that have happened to this team, they're not flukes. This is a very good, fundamentally sound hockey team. And, they're not going to be perfect all night, but when you get those games where they're just able to control play and do it on a consistent basis for the most part, that really does add a lot. And then, quickly, you just mentioned the stat about, being 11-1 after back-to-backs. We all looked at the schedule beforehand, once they had that big gap in between games earlier in the month, and then they were going to have this sort of rush of games together. And we all thought, oh, well, this, New York fans, we're always looking at the doom and gloom. This is when it's going to go down. This is when it's going to happen. Something bad is going to happen. And then the thing that we think is going to happen isn't going to happen. It doesn't happen. So it's really refreshing to see that, because it really does show again, and we've reiterated this over and over again, that Valette has the pulse of this team, and they are not only playing well, but they're playing just good, smart, fundamentally sound hockey, and it's so nice to see. So the Pittsburgh game, it was fun to be there and see them just potting goals left and right, especially after some of the debaucheries that I've seen there in person. Defense could have been a little better, but the next day kind of quelled all that. So it was a good weekend, not to say the least.
Yeah, perfect weekend for sure. So, one of the things that has come up in this run that I wanted to talk about just briefly here, and Steve Valette kind of went off on this in the post-game show after the loss to Winnipeg on Tuesday. And it's I'm certainly not trying to be negative about Steve here. I think he does an awesome job on the MSG coverage. Also, shout out to Brian Boyle, who was excellent between the benches. I hope that he is allowed to reprise that role as often as he wants, because he added a ton of value to the broadcast. Kind of good, nice to have a little bit of a younger, more modern voice with a really good understanding of the modern game. Smart guy, really fun to listen to. So, and really enjoyed that addition to the MSG broadcast. Look, Valette was, he's had this habit of sort of pouring cold water on things this year. He's been a little bit more negative, and he's kind of even acknowledged it and said, like, I'm just so desperate to see them win. So I guess he feels as though as an analyst, he wants to really stay on top of them. But it does a little bit kind of come across at times as like being a perfectionist, right? Like there were games like where after wins, he was kind of super negative, and I found that a little odd. One of his main points, though, in the post game on Tuesday was that the Rangers have not performed well in this most recent stretch against playoff teams. And, if you look at the raw record, yes, they lost to Florida, they lost to Tampa, they lost to Winnipeg. They have a couple more games coming up, Boston on Thursday, Florida on Saturday. So I guess, JL, what are your thoughts? I mean, how do you feel about, and how much emphasis do you put on record versus teams in playoff position, as you're preparing for the playoffs? Is that something that you look at? Because I know, look, Steve's not alone, right? Steve just says it on TV, but there's a ton of fans who, like you said, can be on the pessimistic side and say, sure, we have a great record, we're in first place, but we don't beat any good teams. What do you say to that? How do you feel about that?
I think the criticism is valid to a degree, but it's also not the end all be all. From a fan's perspective, I can understand, if Valakut wants to see the team win. I can understand the certain frustration after covering the team for so long, especially after what happened last season. It is kind of jarring, and a lot of us, at least I am, still kind of feeling it a little bit, even though I'm not one to sit and dwell on the negative too much, obviously, because this season has been nothing but fantastic. But, last season was also, record wise, at least, a success, even though we all know it really wasn't. So I think what the outlook comes in from is that it's kind of like, can this hold up? And you obviously you want to see them beat playoff teams, which is where I disagree with I was gonna say Laviolette with Valakut, is that yeah, I know he's a former professional goalie and he's inundated with stats and he has a better eye for the game than I do. So I'm not going to criticize. I love Valakut. So obviously he provides an insight that I'm definitely not just going to brush off. But one of the things I've noticed just as a fan of hockey over the years is that usually these regular season games after a certain point tend to not really matter, especially if the team is doing really well. Now, if the team was kind of on the upswing and they were scrapping out trying to scrap out a playoff spot, and we're looking to try and really make a name after a deadline to try and bolster the team, then yeah, I could see how that would be concerning, because the team has, potentially been mediocre a whole season, and we've seen it with the Rangers before, and you want to see it kind of even out. But where I disagree with Valakut is that it's not all doom and gloom, and I think this team has more than enough gusto to take on playoff teams. The playoffs are a completely different animal. Everybody thought that the Rangers were going to hold up their own against the Devils, or everybody thought the Penguins were going to wipe the floor with the Rangers 2 years ago. Same thing with Carolina. But then it just all depends on who you have, the experience, and what goes on. And I'm in the camp of I need to see it when it happens, because I've come to find out that if I'm in the business of making predictions and the trends are kind of inconsistent, there really is no point in trying to make a prediction, because then you're almost always going to be wrong,
Right.
And I know that sounds kind of stupid, but like, again, I'm going to use last year as an example. Granted, we all know that the team was fractured, but relatively speaking, they were okay for the most part. Like, they were able to manage their way into a playoff spot and keep it there for the whole season. But then you come to see what happens after game 2, and there's your real litmus test. And what we were really worried about kind of came into fruition. So now that we've had basically the same roster, if you really think about it, with some added help, with the coach that was needed then, we have him now. I'm not going to go all doom and gloom until I see this team fall apart in the playoffs, which, knock on wood, I don't want to happen. So while I do understand where Valakut comes from with a lot of his criticisms, and it is very valid too, because, he's not just talking out of his rear end. At the same time, you can't really rely on it too much because this team has basically been in a good position all year, and they've proven night in and night out that they've been able to really overcome a lot of odds. So am I going to really lose my bacon over a couple of losses at the end of the season? For the most part, not really. If they start a playoff series and they just don't have the foot on the pedal, okay. My again, and I'll end it with this. Over the last couple of years, I've paid attention to strategies and how teams, operate on the ice. And one of the things that, that frustrated me and obviously all of us with a lot of the coaches that this team has employed is that it's kind of just like, okay, we're just going to free ball it and see what happens. So kind of let the players do what do what they do. But outside of a couple of instances that I could probably try and recall, most cup teams win with teams that are structured because they're able to adjust when teams adjust against them. And that was one of the biggest problems this team had last season. But the thing that I've seen the most this year is that this team has been able to adjust on the fly in the middle of games. You've seen Laviolette either go a little bit more passive on the forecheck in the neutral zone, or we've seen him adjust to where the team gets aggressive in the offensive zone and kind of give up a little bit defensively to try and get a goal, when they need it. And it's worked on many occasions. So while Valiket's, his analysis is very valuable and it does have a lot of weight behind it, I'm in the camp that I need to see it happen before I can say, yeah, that was pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, what I'll say is this too. You can look back. The Rangers have played 69 games now, and he was only looking at this most recent stretch. And I get it, right? It's post trade deadline. This is the team you're getting ready now. This is truly like fine tuning your game for the playoffs. I understand all that, but go back to February. I mean, right in a row, the Rangers beat Colorado and Tampa Bay, like 2 of the last 3 cup winners. And they beat them pretty convincingly. Like those were not games where the Rangers were running around and over relying on the goalie. And, there weren't stolen wins by Igor or Quick. Those were games where the Rangers outplayed the opponent and deserved to win. Most recently, right, they beat Carolina in a really hard fought game on a back-to-back right after an emotional game win over Jersey. So, to me, those are the types of things that indicate to me, sure, they can have success, but more to the point, I think, and I'm in agreement with you, JL, is like, it doesn't really matter. Like, I think what matters to me and kind of to the point I was alluding to earlier is the overall process good, right? Like, are they generally playing even with or carrying play against their opponents, right? Is the power play clicking? How do the line combinations work? Have they found something here with Miller and Schneider that maybe makes them, think twice about going back to the original defense pairings? If they continue to find success the way the current alignment is, even just knowing what your options are. I think, the line juggling that even Laviolette did last night, or I should say Tuesday night against Winnipeg and to start the third period. In previous years, I think a lot of fans, myself included, would get very anxious about that, right? Because, when Gerard Gallant did that, you never knew it was going to happen the next day in practice. And it often meant like Alexis Lafreniere was going to be a healthy scratch or Barclay Goodrow was going to be on the top line, right? Like you had these sort of like seismic shifts that, like you said, really were not tied to tactics or strategy, but were just kind of like what an average or below average coach does to try and force his team back into the box, if you will. And Laviolette doesn't do that. And I think he's proven that throughout this entire year. He was trying things on Tuesday night just to see if he could get a spark. And I think in the back of his mind was probably like, okay, if this were a playoff game and we had that second period, right? We gave up those 3 goals, the couple of weird bounce rebound goals, but then a bad breakaway, bad turnover by Kreider. Very little back check, although it was the end of his shift. I think people went a little too crazy about that as well. He had been out there for a minute and 12 seconds. Zibanejad hustled back. They were gassed. There was no way they were catching Scheifele on that play. But, those types of things happen. What's our response and what's the plan, right? So he juggled the lines. He flip-flopped Kreider and Zibanejad. He moved Kreider up and down a little bit. He gave, Wenberg a shot in the top 6. So, it's just to see what you can do and what might work. And then of course he does try Miller and Fox as a pairing in late game situations where they need a goal, they need offense. So I think it's more about that. And to me, the opponent is secondary. I mean, the Rangers have played very good games against very good teams. They've played very bad games against good teams and vice versa, right? They've played bad games against good teams and whatever, they've done it all through 69 games. And, what you're looking for here is a team that is finishing strong going into April, but is also healthy. I mean, that's the other thing that is just so paramount right now. And we've already had some injury scares with Lindgren going down on Sunday, which everyone thought was going to be a season ender. Trouba's out a couple of weeks. Obviously, no one knows what the injury is. Panarin's got his finger wrapped because he took a nasty slash a couple of games ago. And I saw when he took his glove off during the game on Tuesday that he had his finger wrapped up. So these bumps and bruises pile up. And, you don't know what other guys are dealing with. We've speculated about Zibanejad. I've speculated about Goodrow, who has, I know people are never really impressed with Barclay Goodrow, but he's been below his standards most of this year. So to me, those are the most important things. Like, is the overall process good? Does the team know what the plan is? Do they have a structure, and are they healthy going into into game 83, into the first game of the playoffs? So that I think, that matters to me more than their record against playoff teams in March and April. I honestly could care less. All right. Last thing before we get to the questions, because there are a bunch of good ones. Let's keep it brief, JL. How excited are you for the return of Matt Rempe? He will probably be in the lineup on Thursday night.
I am very excited. I like Matt Rempe. I think he adds a lot to the fourth line. I think that's something the Rangers haven't had in a long time. And honestly, I kind of want Adam Edstrom back up here too, but in due time. But I'm excited. I can't wait to see him back there and defensemen get scared for their lives going into corners with pucks. He just needs to control himself.
Yeah, I think it was the right move by Laviolette to leave Brodzinski in for Tuesday night. I mean, he, obviously Rempe's suspension had ended. He could have come back in, but the Rangers have had no practice time. As a matter of fact, yesterday, if you're listening to this pod on Thursday, that was Jack Roslovic and Alex Wenberg's first and Chad Ruedels. That was all their first proper practices as Rangers. Think about that. The trade deadline was 13 days ago. So it's crazy, but that's how nuts the schedule has been. There just has not been time for practice. Obviously, when you do have off days, you want the guys to be off the ice so that they can recover more efficiently. So, so he hadn't had a practice. And I think, the other thing is Brodzinski played really well on Sunday. He scored the game-winning goal. He was named first star of the game. And I think, one of the things that I, appreciate now about the addition of Rempe is that, again, just the depth of this Ranger team is really good. I think it's something that isn't talked about enough. But when your 13th forward option is either Johnny Brodzinski, who's had a very solid year, 15, 16 points, good underlying numbers, and Matt Rempe, who's a 6'8" wrecking ball who really changes the way your opponent plays when he's on the ice, those are really good options to have. And then, like you mentioned, JL, Adam Edstrom becomes your 14th forward. He's shown that he could potentially be a capable, NHLer in limited minutes, and we know they've got some youth and as well as some veterans down in Hartford that could be tried in a pinch. So really good depth. I'm excited for Rempe, especially, given the opponent. Boston is a team that does toe the line. They've got a few players, obviously Marchand, Trent Frederick. Now they've added Pat Maroon. They added Andrew Peak. I don't know if he's necessarily like a bruiser, but he's a big physical defenseman. So we'll see. That'll be an interesting matchup. And like you said, I'm certainly excited for his first opportunity to chase a puck into a corner on Thursday night.
I agree.
Anything else to add, or should we get to the questions?
Let's get to the questions. We've got a couple, some pretty good ones. I actually had, I tweeted out a very passive aggressive response to get people to tweet in. And I guess that's what I need to do going forward because people seem to respond to it. So, all right. So let's begin with the questions. So this one comes from Anthony Cataturo. I apologize, Anthony, for messing up your name. At Cataturo Anthony. He writes, how come everybody thinks putting home ice versus Carolina is worth it just to play Washington or Philly in round one?
I love this question. I absolutely love this question because I've seen an awful lot of chatter, and I know Dave has tweeted about it. I've tweeted about it. And I've said my piece here, and I think a lot of people probably disagree. There's two facets to this. First of all, it's a great point by Anthony, right? So fine, if you lose enough games and you drop into second, you theoretically have an easier matchup against Washington, Philly, or I guess maybe the Islanders, or whoever, feels like waking up and winning 4 games and getting that third spot in the Metro down the stretch here. Fine, you have a theoretically easier matchup, but of course we know nothing's easy in the playoffs right off the bat. And then you have to turn around and play Carolina, assuming they win as the overwhelming favorite in their first round matchup, and you don't have home ice advantage. So that's a great point right off the bat. My piece of this that I know is not popular because, whatever, because this is just how people think about sports here, and it's kind of a zero-sum game, and I get all that, but I think winning your division is an accomplishment worth celebrating. I think winning the President's Trophy is an accomplishment worth celebrating. I
100%.
do think that, especially in hockey, it's a slim advantage, but having home ice advantage is huge. Obviously we know up until Tampa Game 7 2015, the Rangers had never lost a Game 7 on home ice. Henrik Lundqvist was a huge part of that, but it was a real thing. They won all their Game 7s. I think when the Stanley Cup final goes to a 7th game, the home team has won 60 or 65% of those games. So it's an advantage. And so I'm not saying like hang banners for winning the Metro and winning the President's Trophy, although you do get a banner for a President's Trophy, as you should. That's worth celebrating. That is a really, really hard thing to do. Hockey is an incredibly physical, grueling, difficult game to play. There's a ton of parity because of the salary cap and the draft and all these other things. The talent level across all the teams is very, very close together. The goaltending is incredible. All these different factors make it very hard to win hockey games. The point differentials between teams at the top, basically right down through the 10th or 11th or 12th place team in the league is like 1 to 2 points per team. We're right, 1 to 2 points per slot. If you come out on top at the end of an 82 game schedule, like hats off to you. Have a beer, even though I know hockey doesn't do the thing baseball does with, champagne celebrations after every clinching game. But like have a drink, have a cigar, celebrate how you want, because that is something worth celebrating. So totally agree, Anthony. I don't want them to punt first place. Like finish strong, get home ice, and play whoever it is, whether it's Tampa or whoever else it might be in round 1.
So as evident as last season and basically anytime, anywhere in the Stanley Cup playoffs, it doesn't necessarily matter that, where you're positioned unless you're this ultimate wagon. And even if you are this ultimate wagon, you still will probably lose if you just don't show up. So it doesn't matter if they punt or not. First of all, why would anyone want to, I agree with Anthony. Why would anyone want to punt, just to play an easier matchup? You never know if they can just turn it on,
Right.
at the right time. Look at the perfect example were the Los Angeles Kings in the mid 2010s. They turned it on at the right moment, played opponents who were apparently better than them, and they were able to push through. So why would the Rangers put themselves in a situation to where they could potentially embarrass themselves after having such a strong season? That's akin, and I think Anthony's a Met fan, so he'll understand this reference. And most people who just follow baseball will get this. It's kind of like when the Mets lost the division in 2022. They were losing games towards the end of the season, and Atlanta took over, the division with their unworldly, winning percentage. And what did it end up? They lost in the wild card, and the Braves themselves ended up losing in the first round against the Phillies. Or they ended up losing against Philly. I can't remember which round it was, but they certainly were not supposed to lose to an 85 win team that eventually made it to the World Series. So the point is that I don't agree with that. Win the President's Trophy, win the division. Like you said, it's a great achievement. Same thing's happening in baseball right now, where it's apparently not being, it's not really taken seriously to win a division, but that's a banner. Just win it and get in. That's it. No need to punt. And who cares if you're number 1 or number 2? You're in. Just play the team. And yeah, I just agree 100%. I don't like when fans say that, because it's just, why? Just it's cool. Oh, hey, look, yeah, we won the President's Trophy. It's just, are you afraid of getting embarrassed? Well, if the team gets embarrassed, then they weren't worth it to begin it with, anyways. Like the Bruins last year. They basically get every pat on the back and accolade possible, and then only to get dusted by the Florida Panthers. So
Yeah, and look, I understand the trepidation about facing Tampa in the first round. That is not a fun matchup, and I'm not craving a matchup with the Tampa Bay Lightning. But there's two points here. One is if you finish first overall, you'd play the weaker wild card team, which will probably be some one of Detroit, the Islanders, the Caps, maybe the Buffalo Sabres if they remain hot. Again, you could still get embarrassed. To your point, JL, right? You finish first, and then you play one of those teams, and if you don't show up, you're going to lose. The other thing is, if they have to play Tampa, then they have to play Tampa. That's fine. It is what it is. And as Dave has been saying, try to slay the dragon. It's not a team the Rangers have had any playoff success against in the past. Some very painful loss, two very painful losses to them. So, we'll see how it shakes out. But that's a great question by Anthony, and appreciate it.
All right. So the next question comes from Lex1776 at Alex17 Alex18, and he writes, will Rempe impact who wins the first series? Good question.
So impact who wins. I mean, what I would say to that is, can he have an impact on a first round series? Absolutely. I still think his ideal role on the team is, and look, this could change with 13 games to go. And I believe he'll get, at least half, 6-7 games here as an audition. And, whether it's him or Brodzinski for in game one, right, who's in that playoff starting lineup, remains to be seen. But he to me is situated as like the perfect like change of pace 12th forward right now, where he doesn't necessarily need to play every game, but if you put him in, he will force the other team to adjust. And I do think that has plenty of value. Look, I mean, I think the Rangers are certainly good enough to win a first round series. And I do think Matt Rempe will probably have a small part to play. Look, I mean, is there a chance he like bursts onto the scene and scores like 3 goals in the first round? Like, sure. But what's more likely is he'll play, maybe Brodzinski will play games 1 and 2. They'll split. Rempe will come in for games 3 and 4. Maybe if they win those, he stays in for game 5. You know what I mean, though, that they're both going to get a chance, and maybe matchup dependent, maybe injury dependent, maybe, just momentum dependent, that Laviolette will flip flop between those two as the final forward in the lineup.
I'll just be brief with my answer because I could sit here and, bloviate about Matt Rempe all night. I think it just depends on who the opponent is. Depending on whether the opponent's going to be physical or overly physical or not. I think Rempe fits a more of like a brooding, slower type of game where he can utilize his body outside of, hopefully by the playoffs, he'll have some, mental control of his elbows and all that. But I think it just depends on the opponent. So if they were playing a team that was a bit bigger, let's say they end up playing a team like Tampa, maybe, Rempe could help out. And like you said, split them up a little bit, but you would do it on the reverse, so to speak. So Brodzinski comes in later if you have a lead or a split. But if it's a team like maybe the Islanders, maybe it just depends on who it is in the first round. And
Right.
I certainly think Matt Rempe can be an impact player in the playoffs just on his size alone. And just to kind of quickly sidetrack on that, I think what they should do for the playoffs for the second power play unit is just stick him in front of the net and just have him throw pucks on goal. And he's a big dude, might as well utilize it like what the Bruins did with Zdeno Chara. So
probably something that is deep in the playbook, but in there for sure.
Right. All right. So this next question comes from Jess Rubenstein. This is at the Prospect Park. I disagree with a lot of what he says sometimes, but I do enjoy chatting with Jess. He's a wonderful follow. And this is a pretty good question. We debate this a lot in the chat. I certainly have opinions on this, and I know you do too. Jess writes, explain why Joe Micheletti is a bad announcer.
Oh man. Okay. All right. So I want to try and do this in a classy way that enables me to come across as somebody who knows what they're talking about, right? Because this is also one of those things that is very sort of subjective, emotionally driven, right? Like there's certain announcers that people just love listening to that I don't really think are great. There's certain and vice versa, right? I'll tell you right now, and I know this will be unpopular, especially with our listeners. I think Joe Buck's a great announcer. I know most people don't agree with me.
Is that really an
And
unpopular
obviously that's
opinion these
play by
days?
play. Sorry, go ahead, JL.
Is that really an unpopular opinion these days? I feel
Yes,
like
people
over the
hate
last
Joe
couple,
Buck,
I
especially Yankee fans,
oh
Giants fans,
jeez,
right? Everybody thinks that he hates their team, and it's a very tired thing because he is, technically speaking, and as someone who has done some sports broadcasting and does a podcast and kind of understands the media world a little bit, he is a fantastic, technically perfect, excellent sports announcer, especially for a big event where you don't want a regional sounding voice or, a Homer type broadcast, anything like that. Anyway, that's just one example of how subjective this stuff can be. I know people get emotional about it. I have two problems with Joe Micheletti. And one of them is very simple. It's that he's not a former Ranger. Now, I think the reason they brought him in after John Davidson, I think there were two reasons. The obvious one is that he had worked with Sam before on national broadcast. So if you go back and look at, there's plenty of old games on YouTube now. Sam and Joe were like the B crew on, I think, Fox when Fox had hockey.
yeah, it was Fox. Yeah,
Yeah. So they had worked together, and I think they probably liked each other. And Joe was also local because he was doing Islanders games. So they didn't have to look very far. And that's where I think the idea for Sam and Joe came in. And Joe was young when they hired him. I mean, this was back in 2003, right? This is 20 years ago.
they
The
hired
other
him
thing that's
after
part of that.
2000. JD left after 05,
Oh,
06. So it was
right.
06,
So
07
06,
they hired
07,
him.
he became full-time. Right. So,
Mhm.
so a little less than 20 years, still a long time ago. The other thing that I think is very bizarre is that Joe is actually very similar in the way he talks about the game and analyzes the game to JD. So I think it was a very familiar listen for Rangers fans, and I think a familiar style for Sam to work with. All right. So there's that. My real other gripe with Micheletti is that he is someone who, as the game has continued to evolve, has clearly fallen behind the times. And so now what happens when he analyzes a game is that he basically just sticks with the same handful of phrases and cliches that he already knows. And we're in an age now where unless you are incredibly entertaining, and I'm thinking of Keith Hernandez here, I'm thinking of Clyde Frazier here, right? Two local examples that everybody will know. Unless you are incredibly entertaining and endeared to the fan base, people get bored of that very quickly. So Joe is not really adding a lot of value or knowledge, right? The way that Valette does, the way that Brian Boyle did on Tuesday night's broadcast. And he's also not very entertaining. He's pretty bland. So, yes, he's an experienced analyst. Like, sure, he gets some national gigs during the playoffs when they need to expand the roster of announcers. I don't know if he still does, but I know in the NBC Sports days, he would do a lot of West Coast playoff games, so he's clearly a highly respected analyst in the hockey world, but he doesn't really understand the modern game. Even last night, there was a sequence where I think it was the Wenberg goal, and Brian Boyle was chiming in to break it down, and he was using some phrases that were, I'm like, wow, I've never heard that said on a Ranger broadcast before. And it's nothing super sophisticated, but he mentioned like there were two players screening Hellebuck when the original shot was taken, right? It was Kakko and Wenberg. And he was like, the stacked screen here makes this really difficult on Hellebuck. And even just saying, right, stacked screen, which is something that probably current coaches say and current players might use when they're looking at film, right? Breaking down a game. There's none of that from Micheletti. It's like nice poke check, or, he's saying very obvious things in a not very entertaining way. The last point I'll make is that, and this is something that doesn't grate on me as much as it grates on other people, but I know it does. He is overly complimentary of the other team. So, look, I understand not wanting to be a huge homer, but it is a local broadcast. It's for Rangers fans. So you've got a guy who's not a former Ranger who spends an awful lot of time on the broadcast praising the opponent, like in a way that, last night he wouldn't shut up about Josh Morrissey, and it got annoying even to me. And I have a pretty high level of tolerance for it. and Sam was kind of joining in too. It was last night was a particularly bad Joe game, which is probably why we got this question. Look, I think ultimately with Sam and Joe, they're both a little bit past their prime. They're at this point kind of like an old suit that probably needs to be discarded. Not that I sound not to make that sound as inhuman as it does, but some fresh blood on the broadcast would be appreciated. And I think, look, Sam is someone who is still very entertaining, endeared to the fan base. He probably has the job for life. I don't quite understand why the Rangers haven't moved on from Joe yet.
So I do agree with a lot of what you say about Joe, especially listening to other broadcasts. When I first started watching hockey around the time that he began his time with the Rangers, more consistently rather, for someone who just started watching, it's cool to see, someone just kind of break down what I see in front of me, because I didn't really know what was going on. So he just kind of pointed out the obvious. As I've gotten older, and I've also worked in the sports broadcasting field like you as well. And I've, again, like I mentioned earlier, I've gotten to, into more of analyzing the game in terms of how it is on the ice, having played it a little bit as a kid, and just kind of like understanding it on a outside of a surface level, seeing how things are put together. Joe, he seems like a nice guy, but you listen to other teams' broadcasts, you listen to a lot of these other, like, for example, you look at as biased as they are, before they were taken off TV. You look at Steve Mears, who does the radio for the Penguins now, but he used to do TV, and Bob Airy. Now, Bob Airy, what does Bob Airy have that Joe Micheletti doesn't? Bob Airy played for the team that he's broadcasting for. So he has that sort of, and over the years before he went to radio, which I'm sure they're still doing fine on radio as is, but not only had Bob Airy been complimentary of other teams, but he breaks it down a way that a player would, like what I've seen Brian Boyle do, and I've seen what Ryan Callahan has done, and I've seen what a lot of former players do in the booth. Kevin Weeks also really good at it too on the NHL Saturday.
Dave Maloney on the radio side for the Rangers.
Dave Maloney, there you go, perfect example. He points it out what's happening, but he also kind of breaks it down on why it happened, what caused it, and kind of gets, talks about the terminology and gets deeper into it. The more I've listened, the more I've paid attention, the more I've noticed Joe Micheletti doesn't do that. Whether or not he's kind of phoned it in over the years and they're just keeping him around to please Sam Rosen, and I also think this is also why they're, I've noticed that Dave has also been on a lot more broadcasts as of late, and they're also, checking out a lot of studio guys too. So I just think Joe I don't want to say phones it in, but it just it doesn't have that same level of depth. You listen to guys like, Gary Cohen, Keith Hernandez, and Ron Darling. You could listen to Keith and Ron pontificate about certain things on the game of baseball, but they're getting into the real dirt of it. When it comes to Sam Rosen, I am a play-by-play guy myself in the very small community that I live in. And I just absolutely just love doing it. I'm not going to fault Sam. I would be the same way. I would stick to that job until I die, like Rick Jenneret basically did.
No doubt.
Sam, he has lost a step, but I still think for a guy at his age, I still think his focus is still really good. Yeah, he messes up on a word here and there, but he was doing the same thing back in 2006. It could be worse. We could have Jack Edwards, and Jack Edwards isn't even sick. Whether I don't know if he is or not
anymore.
Yeah, well, I was, so if anyone knows, I do these compilation videos where I combine both the home and away broadcasts, and they're really fun to do. I really enjoy doing them. I haven't really done much of them lately, but I was doing the games that I do for the Bruins and Ranger games are some of the funniest ones, because Jack Edwards has such a hard time pronouncing the simplest things. Like when Nick Bonino scored his first goal, it goes, Nick Bolino. It's like, oh my gosh, how do these people listen to this? And the crazy part is
that's a big market. That's not
right.
like happening in Arizona. That's happening in Boston. It's like the third biggest hockey market in the country.
Right. And the crazy part is, as much as a homer as he was, you rewind to years ago, he was very good. He was on it. So I don't know what happened between then and now because he's clearly not sick. He said he's not sick, and he's not under any sort of influence. I'm not going to make that claim about the guy, you know. So what the heck happened? So when it comes to a guy like Sam Rosen, even though there was at one point he was calling Tyler Bozak Ryan for many, many years, he still has it. So I'm not going to front on him. But when it comes to Joe, I just think he's not as analytical and he doesn't really break it down. He basically just tells you what happens. He says he enters into the zone and then bam, like Emeril
Right.
Lagasse there, you know?
Yep.
So yeah, I saw that, but tell me why it happened. What did they do? You know, Eddie Olchuk is great at that. You know, JT
Right.
Brown is great with that. The Kraken have a phenomenal broadcast. So,
Yeah.
you know, but that's my take on it.
Yeah, no, and I was going to say just very briefly because you mentioned they are starting to try to bring in some new blood. Dave's been on, Maloney, Brian Boyle. I do wonder if it would even be nice if they just rotated some of the cast in and out, right? You could have
Mhm.
a different guy in the booth with Sam, or even give Sam a few games off, right? Maybe he doesn't travel as much as he gets up there in age.
Yeah.
We'll see how they go with that.
Well,
But
I'll
anyway,
say
yeah,
this
let's.
too. I'll say this too, real quick, just to talk on the broadcasters. I do think if the Rangers don't win a cup this year, or even if they do, but I think maybe this year or next year, I think Sam's going to go the route that Howie Rose is currently going with the Mets. Howie Rose is cutting down his games on the radio.
Mhm.
Howie is up there in age. He's had some health issues over the last couple of years, but thankfully he's still in really good health. But he's basically almost at the point where he's doing the Vince Scully, where he's only traveling to cities not too far from New York and like Florida,
Right.
So I
They all love
think,
Florida.
yeah, of course. So I think after a bit, depending on how this season goes, I think if the Rangers do well, if not, maybe within a year or two, we begin to see Sam kind of cut down his workload. And I think honestly, you're gonna have someone like we mentioned in the chat. Maybe they reach out to Bob Wischusen again, which I think is ideal. Either Bob Wischusen, Kenny Albert, and the guy who's been doing radio for them a little bit outside of Don LaGreca has been Alex Faust, and I
Mhm.
think he'd be a good addition to the team permanently. He's very good, very boisterous, very entertaining and engaging play-by-play guy. So
Yep,
that's my
for
thoughts on
sure.
that. All right, next question. This comes from at Pans21, Mark Panzer, and he writes, forward lines as constituted as they were at practice today, which would be Wednesday, and I'm assuming in Boston. Are those your preferred ideal lines if game one was tomorrow and we're all a go? I think that's what we see and what he wants. Do you think matchup would play any role in a change from that?
All
Great
right, so
question.
we talked about this briefly, but I'll run through the lines very quickly. They're as they've been basically Kreider, Zibanejad, Roslovic, Panarin, Trocheck, Lafreniere, Cooley, Wenberg, Kako, VZ, Goodrow, Rempe. Those are your four forward lines. Brodzinski as the 13th forward healthy scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to get into the defense pairs because it's a separate conversation and there's
Right.
injuries.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's how I would start. That's how I would start the playoffs game one. I think those are the best line combinations. I think, again, that's borne out in the data and the results and the performance on the ice. The other thing about Rempe, I know we talked about him briefly before, like when he's out there, generally good things are happening. The Rangers actually get scoring chances. He's not like Ryan Reeves where like, yeah, okay, he throws a big hit, but it's 3 seconds behind the play and the other team's coming up ice with the puck and it doesn't matter because they're getting scoring
Right.
chances.
Yeah.
Rempe has had a lot of chances to actually score goals. He scored a goal off his leg, but they all count. He's
Mm-hmm.
got an assist, and he has that one goal that he should have scored against St. Louis that was disallowed. Well, it was properly disallowed because it never went in, but
Never went
it
in.
looked
Yeah.
like it, just had skittered across the goal line off a great rush and feed from Barclay Goodrow. So,
Mm-hmm.
look, to me, I like those lines. I think that there's balance. I think that there's offense and defense on all four, maybe a little less defense on the Trocheck, Panarin, Lafreniere line, but they've been so dynamic offensively that, you're obviously going to roll with that. So, yeah, I mean, for me, no notes. And the only thing, like we mentioned before, is that, yeah, Brodzinski probably slots in at some point during a playoff series if you need a change of pace.
Yeah. You basically said what I was about to say, just more eloquently. because I'm an idiot. No, yeah,
No.
pretty much. Yeah, I mean, there's really, and like I said before, it also depends on the matchup. So I think with a team like Boston, and with guys like Trent Frederick, Pat Maroon, and even a guy like Charlie McAvoy, and you mentioned Andrew Peak, you want someone with a bit more size. And if correct me if I'm wrong, when just in regards to Rempe and that fourth line, um, they've had some pretty good numbers, like analytics wise, where it's just they've
Yes.
kind of been more of a net positive than anything on the ice.
Rempe
And
is definitely a net positive. I think he's been it's something like, just going off high danger chances, like 10 high danger chances, 4 and 6 against, something like that. I don't
right,
know if that's exactly right, but it's something in that neighborhood.
right. And obviously it's probably not going to be as high as the games go along, but you can clearly see that there is a positive result from just having him in the lineup. So I think, like I said, depending on the opponent, um, Rempe and Brodzinski will slot in. Like you said, also the D pairs. We all know what those are going to be pretty much. Because you said injuries, but I agree with you 100%.
Nice. All right. I think we
All
got one
right.
more.
I think we do, yes. So this next question comes from one of our own, at Brooklyn Joker 90. It's Nick. And I'm gonna read this in a voice, because the way he started it off, I'm gonna
Yes,
read this in the voice of like a WFAN caller.
please do.
Yeah, so this is Nick from down south. Nick, you're on the fan. Oh, hey, first time, long time. Of the three, who would you want the fourth line come game one of the playoffs? Matt Rempe, Johnny Brodzinski, or Adam Edstrom? Also, would you rather have VC or Cooley on the third line moving forward? I'll hang up and listen.
That was perfect. That was
Thank you.
absolutely
Thank you.
perfect. You gotta pocket that and break it out
Oh,
whenever you need to.
jeez. Don't get me started, but yeah.
So that was essentially the same question. I mean, to me, look, I like the lines the way they are constructed. I will say that it does make sense that when Brodzinski's in the lineup, you put him with Wenberg and Kako, because he's a little bit more of an offensive. He's got more natural offensive ability and a really good shot, right? To kind of pair with Wenberg, who's a good setup guy. Kako, who's a good puck possession guy, and does score now, starting to score on some rebounds and in tight. Brodzinski makes sense, and I think Cooley then with Goodrow and VZ becomes a really good potential shutdown line.
Mhm.
One of the potential drawbacks with Rempe is that he's just maybe not experienced enough to play a proper shutdown role, right? But then you
Mhm.
kind of lean on the Cooley, Wenberg, Kako line to play that shutdown role, and you deploy the fourth line, and they basically just get a little bit less ice time, and they play against the other team's fourth line. That's kind of how you draw it up. So,
Mhm.
um, look, I don't think Adam. I think at this point, it's fair to say Rempe has beaten out Edstrom for that spot. I think we see Edstrom as part of the extended roster Black Aces when the playoffs begin, as long as Hartford is not playing. Well, obviously, if they're
Mhm.
playing, he's going to stay with them. Um, but I like the lineup as it's constituted heading into the Boston game with VZ and Rempe on the fourth line, Cooley on the third line, because that's a really well-rounded third line that can shut opponents down. That Cooley, Wenberg, Kako line, and that line has had a lot of success in the early going since the trade deadline.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm basically inclined to agree. And the good thing about just the versatility that that they currently have is that you can move guys like VC and Cooley to different
Yes.
roles and they'll fit right in. Granted, I personally think Cooley is better suited for the third line, but I'm not going to cry if Laviolette decides to put Jimmy VC with what he did it the other night. Basically, that's what happened on Saturday. Was they put Cooley on the fourth line with Brodzinski and Goodrow, and then they put VC on the third line with Wenberg and
Right. Kako.
Kako. It ended up working out. So I think that's what the versatility comes in and helps. This was something that the team was lacking a lot last year, just in terms of just having that extra bite,
Mm-hmm.
and just
Yeah, well,
having
and
the
they had
vers.
no flexibility in the bottom. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but they had
No,
no
no, no,
flexibility in
yeah,
the bottom six either. It was the kid
right,
line, and then it was Mott, Goodrow, and VZ.
VC,
And
right.
on paper, seems like a good bottom six, but the kid line really was kind of losing its luster. That and you really didn't have anybody that you wanted to move up the lineup unless you shuffled
Right.
everything. So
Mhm.
whereas I think with this alignment, as you were saying, JL, you can move VZ around, you can move Cooley around, you could even put Kako up on the top line, right? If you need to do something like that, right?
Right.
If if Roslovic's not going, or if you want a little bit more of a defensive or two-way, or puck
Mhm.
possession, slow the game down type guy, Kako can play up there. We know he's had some good underlying success in terms of underlying metrics. So the optionality of this lineup, I think, as it's currently constructed, is a huge positive.
Right. And and just also I think the talent is just, even though it's almost the same team, I think the talent on the bottom six is definitely a lot better. So before we end the questions, I do want to acknowledge someone did send a question on your post, but and this is not to get on anyone's case about it. But I just want to acknowledge that someone did submit a question, but I'm making an executive decision and saying that question is not appropriate. I
Okay.
don't think that's something we should really talk about, but I just want to acknowledge that there was one question that was shown, but I just don't think it was, and it's nothing fresh either. I just don't think, the topic is really relevant. But just to the
Okay.
person that put it on your post, I saw the question. Feel free to ask us more questions. Don't feel just because we didn't answer this one that we're never going to answer any other ones. I just want to say that I don't think that question is any relevant. And regarding the person that he mentions in the question, I don't think it's appropriate. So
Makes sense. All right. Well, appreciate that, JL. All right. Well, thanks everybody who did send questions in. We love answering those. Have had a blast this week as usual. And we are looking forward to a huge, at least next couple of games for the Rangers here, with Boston on the docket Thursday night up in Boston, and then back home in prime time against Florida. Rangers are playing against the cream of the crop. We know Steve Valette will have his eye on it. We'll all have our eyes on it. We'll be back to talk about it next week here on Live from the Blue Seats. Thanks for joining us.